Hello, world history students. This is Mr. Everton, and this is our first video in a new unit, Unit 5, The Age of Revolutions. And we're going to start off with 5.1, talking about absolute monarchs. And our question that you'll have to answer at the end of these notes is, how did absolute monarchs maintain their power? We've already talked about absolute monarchs in this class. We just didn't call them that. Like the King of Spain, Philip II, who sent the Spanish Armada to try to invade England, he was an absolute monarch. The Habsburg family that he was part of, they were absolute monarchs. Queen of England and her father, Henry VIII, the guy who divorced all of his wives, they were absolute monarchs. So we're going to define what absolute monarchy is. So monarchy is hereditary. It means you get it from your parents, just like my eyes are brown because my mom's eyes were brown, hereditary, right? So like Elizabeth was the queen because her dad, Henry, was the king, hereditary. Monarchy just means king or queen. So hereditary monarchy is kings and queens passing down power to their kids. Pretty straightforward. You probably already knew that, right? If you didn't, it's not that hard to learn. Hereditary monarchy, that's what that means. Now there have been monarchies have usually been hereditary throughout world history. What's different is that in Europe during this time, kings and queens began to solidify more power. They began to bring other people who had power in their kingdoms under their control. So like, for example, the church or nobles, or in England, the parliament, which is like English Congress. So like, so these kings and queens start to establish more power by taking it away from other people who live in their country. And they justify this with what they call the divine right of kings, which means that God put them in charge, which is why Charles I of England is saying what he's saying in this hilarious picture that I made. And this means that literally, like, whatever the king or queen says is the law, and they're not able to break the law. Like, they call all the shots and everybody has to do what they say. Yeah, I think I pretty much explained it. So I'm going to give you a couple examples of absolute monarchy during the 16 and 1700s in Europe. First is the most important example, the most famous example. His name's Louis XIV. So remember, when we talk about kings and queens, a lot of times there's more than one king or queen of a country who has the same name. There were literally 13 different people before this guy who were named Louis, who were king of France. So he is Louis XIV, and they use Roman numerals, which if you're not that familiar on them, it's not a big deal. X is 10, IV is 4, so XIV is the 14th. He was the king of France for a long, long time, from the time he was 12 or something, to when he died at the age of 75. He was a very successful monarch. He is the example of absolute monarchs that people give. A lot of time, his nickname is the Sun King because he's the center of the universe. Everything revolves around him, and he's also so bright and shiny, and if you look at him too close, you'll burn your eyes out. And supposedly at one point he said, "L'état c'est moi," which is French for "the state is me," meaning I am the government. There is no other government. It's me. I'm the only person who is the government, and everything I do has the power of the government. And here you can see him posing for one of his many portraits. He was a very vain person who was very into his looks. This is the fashion at the time. This is also proof that gender norms change over time, right? Like if a man walked out dressed like this today with the long curly hair and the tights, actually probably nobody would say anything. But if somebody walked out like this in 1980s, people would oh, he's dressed all femme. No, he's not dressed femme, actually. In the time period, this was very masculine. To show people your shapely legs with heels was a way of being yeah, I'm a tough dude and I have a lot of power. Louis XIV built a huge palace, a big old honking palace called the Palace of Versailles. That's how you pronounce that word. If you say Versailles, I will actually laugh at you. I won't. That would be mean. But it's pronounced Versailles because it's French. So in French, they always have lots of extra letters at the end that you don't have to pronounce. Versailles. Anyway, and the point of Versailles is that it cost billions of dollars. It was enormous. it was architecturally extremely impressive. So remember back in Unit 2 when we talked about monumental architecture, where if a king or an emperor builds a really impressive building, people will be like, damn, that guy's so powerful. How do you get that building built? This is an example of that. This is a picture of the inside of Versailles. Nope, I thought I had a picture of the gardens. The gardens are also very beautiful. I don't have a picture of them. Another reason why he built this was because Louis XIV made all of the nobles of France like come live with him at least part of the time in Versailles. And the nobles were people who like had some power, had some political power and wanted to have more. And Louis XIV would literally get them to compete over jobs to do for him, like brushing his hair and holding his coat when he woke up in the morning and like serving him eggs. Like he would get the nobles so like obsessed with trying to do what he wanted that they were like arguing over who got to brush his hair. And this was a way of keeping the nobles in one place where he could keep an eye on them and where he could make sure that he knew what they were up to. Louis established state control over the army, which means the government of France, was the only institution that had control over the army. Before this, the nobles had control over their own army, and Louis XIV put an end to that, which is something we take for granted, right? Like the government controls the army. Well, it didn't used to be that way. Also, Louis XIV taxed peasants a whole lot in order to pay for a series of wars, which he used to expand French territory and gain glory for himself. And here you can see a picture of him. It's not a unicorn. That's like a sword coming out of its head. That, it's like behind. Anyway, it's not a unicorn. But that's Louis XIV on the back of a horse, and the horse is rearing up on its hind legs to show you how powerful and strong it is and how Louis is able to control the strong and powerful horse. So that's Louis XIV in France. France is where you see the word Versailles written. Now, on the other side of Europe, we have another example of an absolute monarch. And this guy is from Russia. His name is Peter the Great. And the ruler of Russia was called the Tsar. And you can spell Tsar either with a CZ or a TS. It doesn't matter. You can spell it either way and it's correct. And Peter the Great was one of the most important czars of Russia. He's absolutely an example of an absolute monarch. And he, let me go back to here. He, in his younger days, took a trip to Western Europe. He went to England and he went to France and he saw how the Europeans on the other side of Europe did things. And he really liked it. He thought it was awesome. Also, if you look at this map again, this piece of this water, I didn't do a good job of marking this, and I don't want to restart the video, but the water next to Russia is called the Baltic Sea. And Russia wanted access to the sea because they were mostly landlocked and they were trying to get access to the water. So under Peter the Great, Russia expanded and took over land that was on the coast of the Baltic Sea so they could have port cities. And under Peter the Great, because he liked France so much, because when he visited France, he thought they really knew what they were doing, he started something called Westernization, which means he wanted to make Russia more like Western Europe. Russia had an inferiority complex. They were like, oh, we're not as good as everybody else. And Peter the Great was like, no, we are going to be as good as the people of Western Europe. So here you can see a map. See, I circled it here. There I go. That's what I'm doing. That purple is the land that was taken over by Peter the Great. And in that land, he built a new city, which he called St. Petersburg. And he made that the new capital of the Russian Empire. So Louis XIV built Versailles. Peter the Great built St. Petersburg, which I don't know where he got that name from. It's weird. I don't know how he came up with that. St. Petersburg is a beautiful city that is no longer the capital of Russia. Now the capital of Russia is Moscow again. But back in the day, it was, he moved it from Moscow to St. Petersburg. He also challenged the Greek Orthodox Church. So he built St. Petersburg. Now we're shifting gears. Before Peter the Great, going back to a long time ago, the year 1000, Russia had become Christian, and they practiced a kind of Christianity called Greek Orthodox Christianity. And this is a picture of some Russian peasants or serfs from the middle of the 1800s, but it gives you an idea of what the style of dress was at the time. I mean, these are poor people, but rich people would dress like this too. They would just have nicer clothes and they would be cleaner. people who were Greek Orthodox, it was religiously significant to them to have big beards. Like if you were a man and you were Greek Orthodox, you needed to have a beard. And also you wanted to have coats that went down over your legs, long coats. Peter the Great, when he was in Western Europe, he saw that nobody in France dressed like that. They all were clean shaven or had mustaches. And they all had clothes that stopped at their waist. And so Peter the Great, as a way to try to modernize Russia, started to encourage people to not have beards. And then he actually outlawed beards unless you paid a tax. You would have to pay money to Peter the Great in order to get to wear a beard. And once you paid money, you can see this coin here with the beard on it. That is a coin you'd have to keep on you. And if you're walking out in public and like the police stopped you, you'd have to be able to, and you had a beard on, you would have to be able to show them that coin as proof that you had paid your beard tax. And if you didn't, they would like cut your beard off on the spot, or they would like pull it out, which, ow, that would hurt a lot. Also, there were people with like scissors, like cutting people's coats so that they would be like the appropriate length. And there's stories about like Peter the Great hosting people at his palace in St. Petersburg and like forcing everybody to shave before they could eat. So why did he act like that? Again, because he was trying to make Russia more like France. He saw the style in France and he was like, yeah, all these people in Russia are like outdated with their beards and their long coats. We need to be more like Western Europe. We're going to try to modernize and make Russia just like the rest of Europe. So how did absolute monarchs maintain their power? I think you have enough now to answer this question. Make sure that you're using 3 complete sentences or I will not grade it. Hope you enjoyed these notes, and as much as I enjoyed giving them to you. Yeah. Happy New Year.